Please welcome to the stage Natalie Kruse Daniels, gardener, swim mom, goat farmer.
These are the hills in Appalachian, Ohio that grew me. We see the beauty, but we might miss the poverty or the generations of disinvestment. We might get to go hiking in the Hocking Hills near Logan, or go biking at Bailey's Trail near Chansey. We miss the vulnerability that also makes our communities and our people more vulnerable in a changing climate. These are also the hills that grew me. Between our hills lies the legacy of coal mining, where pyrite or fool's gold that was unearthed during coal mining weathers to create a discharge that's acidic and metal rich, that paints our streams orange and kills fish and bugs. And makes some kids draw their streams orange because that's what they grew up with. And that legacy makes us more vulnerable in a changing climate, whether it's due to compaction or deforestation, or slurry ponds that hold back mine waste that can fail during flooding. But that vulnerability isn't just about the environment, it's about the people and the communities too. There's a pride in a Hardy's work. That industry fueled our economy and built wealth for the state of Ohio. But that same bygone industry leaves our communities without access to things that we might take for granted, like transportation or broadband, economic opportunity, healthcare, food. We've invested in treating the water, like here in Carbondale, Ohio, where 1,000 pounds of lime per day are dosed into the stream to eventually 8 miles downstream recover the fish and bugs and stop fish kills that happened for many years previous to this treatment. We have worked for decades to reforest our mine lands. Like here when I was a kid planting trees on an abandoned mine, to efforts that we continue to this day to reforest our mine lands and hold those soils in place and stop the erosion and the landslides that can make our environments and our people more vulnerable in a changing climate. And we've seen successes. People have pride in their streams. Like here in Raccoon Creek where this fish was caught, in 2021, 100 miles of Raccoon Creek were redesignated by the Ohio EPA from limited resource water, never expected to recover, to exceptional warm water habitat and warm water habitat way exceeding our expectations. But still our communities get left behind, where the people still have that legacy of generational poverty and isolation and lack of access to resources, whether it's water and wastewater or broadband and jobs. When you can't make ends meet, climate adaptation and resilience are a luxury. The way that our towns were settled makes them more vulnerable, where company towns and other communities that were built around industry that's gone now were built on the only flat land available right next to the creek. If people have house insurance, they certainly don't have flood insurance and rely on long commutes on back roads along creeks to get to jobs. And these communities flood over and over again. In this community growing up, my little brothers got flooded into their elementary school. And we had to bring in, as if I was doing that, people had to bring in pizza and blankets and pillows by canoe to keep the kids safe overnight. And these communities get hit over and over again. And the way that we respond to that in our region is neighbors helping neighbors. We can't move past that response of neighbors helping neighbors to planning and recovering without poverty alleviation, without closing the gap in the vulnerability that makes that risk so much higher. We can't build resilience without building our communities. The other side of that coin is the exceptional drought we've been facing this year, where small-scale farmers lack the hay to get through the winter. This year they maybe got 1 cut of hay, where in a normal year you might get 2 or 3. So with the underlying vulnerability of isolation and poverty, climate layers on top of that to increase that. When we think about those layers of vulnerability, we can think about access to resources that we might take for granted. In the Buckeye Hills region in Southeast Ohio, about half the people lack access to municipal drinking water. And they fill the gap by hauling water, by relying on unreliable wells, filling jugs at the Walmart or at roadside springs, and showering at friends' houses. So my challenge to everyone in this room today is about reframing climate resilience to be about investment in community building that builds resilience and addresses that underlying vulnerability. We can't build resilience without first dealing with poverty and access to food and healthcare and other resources. We can reframe climate resilience as naming and dealing with the health disparities and the poor social determinants of health that affect our communities by knowing who's vulnerable and how we're going to serve them in the next disaster rather than leaving them behind, and recognizing that people living with a burden disease are more vulnerable to heat and power outages and other disruption. We can reframe climate resilience as investing in local food and farming that are less susceptible to supply chain disruption and give people options beyond the Dollar General and the local gas station. And when we invest in local food and farming, we also create connection and community. We can reframe climate resilience as investing in the rural economy. When we build a rural economy based on outdoor recreation, we can steward our natural resources and build economic opportunities for our communities so that we both deal with mitigation and adaptation together and give people a reason to stay. We can reframe climate change as investing in and encouraging community art, like here at Passionworks in Athens, where artists with and without developmental disabilities create alongside each other. That creates inclusion and connection, and during a disaster, that connection is critical to serving the most vulnerable in our communities. We can reframe climate adaptation as investing in our downtowns, as building public transportation and broadband access, because when people have economic opportunity, they can adapt and they can be resilient. And when we have connection and sense of place, we can deal with disaster together. So while I might be those hills and hollows that grew me, and you might be the neighborhoods and main streets, whether we're urban or rural, the same thing rings true. Building more resilient communities starts with local action, and investing in equity and building up our community and finding those points of vulnerability to address those. We can invest in our local trusted resources to build a more resilient future.